Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Doolery official podcast, Form Doolery. It's just us six guys, and we all share one brain cell. So today we're going to be talking about what we all identify a sport as. So this has been a conversation that we've been having mainly with one of our members this entire time, and I say this entire time, like since last year at least. And so we're going to try to come to a definition that we can all agree on. So everyone, if you would like to introduce yourselves and what sport you play, we could start with Cooper.
I'm Cooper. I used to play soccer.
Hello, my name is Ryan, and I used to play soccer, baseball, but majority of my high school time was spent swimming.
Hi, I'm Jackson. I have played a lot of sports. Some of them are actually sports. A lot of them are activities. So
And what are these sports that you play?
I did soccer, baseball, basketball, cross country, karate, and marching band.
What's up, guys? I'm Luke. I play soccer, basketball, football, and pickleball.
Awesome. Okay, last there's me, your host. I am James. I grew up playing soccer. I also played a little bit of basketball and baseball, and I ran cross country in high school, and I'm currently in the marching band. So I guess first, let's kick this off and, you know, find what the definition of a sport is. According to Google, there are two definitions. A sport is an activity involving physical exertion and skill in which an individual or team competes against another or others for entertainment. And the informal version is a person who behaves in a good or specified way in response to teasing, defeat, or simpler situation. So I guess we'll start with the big man who we all disagree with. All right, Luke, what is your definition of a sport?
Well, first, if we're going with the first definition about entertainment, that immediately wipes off baseball and golf. Okay, so here's my definition. A sport is a physical competition that requires athleticism, but is most importantly requires defense. So it has to be two people or teams competing against each other where they can inhibit how somebody else does. So that immediately wipes off like swimming, running, golf, not because I don't think they're difficult or they're athletic competitions, but because I think there's a difference between football, basketball, and soccer and swimming. Like I can go out there and defend somebody in basketball. I can keep them from their goal. Swimming, I'm out there racing against somebody. Their goal is to get the lowest time. I am not out there keeping them from getting that time. I have to go out there and compete against them, which is why I put that in as an athletic competition. But it differs from a sport, which requires somebody to be able to inhibit how somebody else does. So in soccer and basketball and football, baseball too, pickleball, tennis, there are people keeping you from scoring, which I think is what defines it as a sport, me personally.
Interesting. Does anyone have anything to say against that? Particularly those who did a sport that Luke would rule out.
I would say for me, I feel like his definition is a little bit too narrow just because the widely accepted definition of sport does not have that requirement of a defense or an offense. 95% of sports are ruled out under that particular definition. And so if we're looking at that in swimming, if it's just an athletic competition, then that takes out some of the prestige and everything contained within it. So if we're talking about that, then I would say swimming is definitely a sport just because the requirement of offense or defense is not necessarily inherent within a sport.
So how would you define a sport then?
I would say definitely it requires physical exertion. It requires some sort of measure as to who wins. And then also it requires people to compete against each other, but not necessarily inhibiting each other.
Okay.
Okay, so this is nothing against swimming. I think swimming is a very difficult activity. I think there is a stark difference between swimming and basketball. There is you're not actively going like against somebody where they can throw you off your game. Swimming, you're just doing your best. Basketball, you can do your best and do a great job and still lose because somebody is inhibiting you and keeping you from doing that. Which is why swimming and basketball have to be in two separate categories. Does that make sense? They're not cut from the same block, which is why whether or not it's a sport, I think there needs to be a different category for sports with defenses.
Okay. Jackson, what you got?
I have a question for you, Luke. So, in wrestling, and also in most combat sports, it's not like how would you consider that to be offense and defense? So, in most of those combat sports, you score points by directly hitting the opponent. So, would you consider just like blocking a hit to be like counting as defense and therefore just being a sport?
Yes, you're actively trying to keep them from scoring that point. You can do something to keep them from getting what they want. Does that make sense?
Yep. Okay, cool.
Yes, it does.
Okay, so I think that a sport is like anything that requires like physical exertion to where like you're trying to like better yourself by some standard. Like so for like swimming, for example, you're trying to better a time to cover a certain distance, and then in like soccer, for example, you're trying to beat the other team by scoring more points. But the difference is, and I think this is where Luke is like he doesn't understand. Um, like sports like soccer, basketball, football, those are under like a subcategory of like games. And there's not I mean, there is a difference. So like sports is like a bigger, broader category. Um and then like games would be the sports that you play where you would have offense and defense and try to score points. And then the other sports would be like swimming, track, cross country, where you're trying to like meet a time or like um, beat an old time or something like that. So that's kind of like what I think.
So you said something about bettering yourself with this physical exertion. So I suggest a new quote unquote sport called extreme standing, where you try to stand
Does standing require
stand
physical
upright.
exertion?
Yes, there is a reason why my Apple Watch has stand goals.
Okay. Okay, Luke, hold on. So
Does
let's say
standing like it's not physical exertion,
Standing
or
for
like,
a
and
long period of time is
it doesn't
physical exertion.
require skill, does it?
It can cause you to pass
You
out.
didn't say skill.
That's something I forgot to mention. It needs to require a skill on some level.
okay, so there's a game that I've played with my dad before where you basically hold your hands up and you're standing in front of them and you're trying to trick them to fall over, right? Technically, if you're considering standing to be physical exertion, you're playing against someone else, so it's on a team basis. That could be considered a sport, right?
Are you playing this for a period of time where standing is going to become difficult?
Sure. I mean, what if you never knock them over? It takes a long time. You're just really good at it.
4 hours of extreme standing. Yes, it's a sport.
So I could technically take any daily activity, like vacuuming, for example. Me and my brother both get a vacuum, and whoever vacuums the most rooms first, and we're allowed to attack each other and try to break each other's vacuum, aka defense. That is a sport to you, Luke. Is that right?
Yes.
You've got to be kidding me.
Okay. There is a ESPN channel called ESPN The Ocho that has some of the greatest forms of media ever. One of them being juggling dodgeball, where there is a group of 6 players playing dodgeball, and there is one person in the back who is juggling bowling pins. And the whole point of it is to knock the bowling pins out of the guy's juggling hands. Greatest sport ever.
So you would consider that a sport?
That is absolutely
Yes.
sweet.
Are we using TV shows to set a standard of what, not TV shows, but TV channels to set a standard as to what a sport is?
ESPN. What does ESPN stand for?
I don't know. Okay, Luke, hold on. So I'm on the ESPN website right now. They have the Olympics as a sport category, and in the most recent Olympics, dancing was in there. Therefore, uh, by this logic of ESPN determining sports, dancing would be a sport.
I don't think ESPN can determine what a sport is
What does ESPN stand
because ESPN the Ocho also had mullet competitions, and I don't fully know if a mullet competition is a sport.
for?
So what I'm hearing, Luke, is that a sport is completely like arbitrary and it can be any activity that requires defense.
No, a sport is whatever I say a sport is.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. Uh-huh.
Under that definition, would me trying to get the last bite of mac and cheese at Thanksgiving, would that be considered a sport? Since it requires defense and offense.
And you
I
have to
mean,
fight your
depends on who
enemy.
you're fighting it for. If it's like you know what I mean, then it could be physical exertion that requires a lot of like skill. But I don't know. It's all up to the how it's played.
Okay,
Let's be honest.
Cooper has been really quiet. He looks like he's contemplating some ideas. What do you have to say?
So back to your little thing about the dancing being a sport because it was in the Olympics. The next Olympics are taking dancing out. So
Hey,
in that,
I am not saying that dancing is a sport just because it's in the Olympics. I was bringing that up to see Luke's reaction to ESPN having like determining what a sport is.
I mean, if you watch that, you could tell it's not a sport. The Australian lady fully embarrassed herself on national TV. Like I I don't know what it was. She was just out there emoting or something.
So, okay, so I think something we can all agree is we know what, like we could look at something and determine if it is or isn't a sport, right? Like would you consider esports to be a sport?
No.
No.
Does not
No.
have physical exertion.
no,
No,
Okay.
yeah, no
Yes.
physical exertion involved.
So we can look at stuff and determine if it is a sport, right? But I feel that Luke's definition is too narrow because I would argue that doing stuff like running is a sport, especially over long distances. So like Luke's definition, because running, really your only defense is your mind, trying to stop you from doing it.
That is an excellent point, James. Good job.
Yeah, that's true for swimming as well,
Question.
come to think of it.
Is life a sport? Because
Yeah.
Satan is playing defense on us?
Yes. As the Bible major,
What?
I can confirm.
Yes, Jackson, speak on this, please.
Because hold on, let me go throw on the suit.
Oh, there he goes.
Real quick, guys, he's going to put on his suit. He's
Oh,
back.
okay.
Gotta
Code
get
is
the
on.
gotta get the pastor coat on first. As we all know, our enemy, who is a very real enemy, is there to stop us from achieving the will of God in our lives. Therefore, we must stand by God and stand by our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ to block against the unholy defense of the enemy. And we must stand by Jesus Christ, who is our QB, and we must receive the holy touchdowns.
Amen.
brother.
God bless
What would
and
be
amen.
Jesus's
Amen.
touchdown celebration?
Well,
definitely
I think
that.
they made a statue of it in Rio, right?
Oh, yeah,
Jesus
the
T
T-pose.
poses
Just
after
a
he
giant
scored.
T-pose.
The T-pose. That makes perfect sense.
Either that or he would moonwalk on water.
Okay, so
Oh, yeah.
going back to the conversation at hand. Honestly, this all started because I was hanging out with Luke and this topic randomly came up because I mentioned that I thought marching band was a sport.
Not a sport.
I would say that's not a sport.
Okay, so that's why we need to come to a definition of what a sport is that we can
I
all
have
agree
a
on.
proposition here.
Okay.
So I think to throw the term sport out the window, I would be willing to. Okay, so on Google, sport is kind of like the overarching umbrella term. I think in this case, Luke has kind of switched the term sport with one of the individual terms that we could also use. I would consider the more specific terms. I just came up with these randomly, but like a game, an activity, a competition, and a performance. Those are like the four types in my book. And so like marching band technically fits into, if we're considering it an umbrella term, a sport because it's a performance. There are a lot of things that are performance that require an incredible amount of physical effort. Things that honestly require a lot more physical effort than marching band does. As someone who has like on a national level performed for marching bands, it's not that bad. Uh, but like it's in the performance category because you practice the one thing that you do. You perform your one thing, you practice your one thing. You don't really you do have to like a little bit make up for you know extraneous circumstances during the performance, but you can reliably guess that everything's going to happen exactly as you've practiced it. The whole point of like a sport or like a game or an activity is that it's not going to go the way you expect. And while that is the case with like performance activities, you can still reliably guess that everything's going to go normal. Other things
Oh,
I
okay.
would consider.
So what about something like bowling? Where ideally all the positions are the same, and you could just master one shot and do it over and over again and consistently get strikes and win.
I would place that in either competition or activity in this setup, because in that case, um, that is you're
Or
not
something like
being
archery
judged
or
on the
even running.
quality of you're not being judged on the quality of the art of your bowling. In marching band and in other sports such as or in other not sports in other performance activities such as that, you're being judged on the quality of like your music and the way you move and that kind of stuff. Bowling, it's points based.
Okay, Luke.
Okay, so since you say that marching band is a performance, I don't think a performance falls into a sport category because the S in cheerleading stands for sport.
I
So I
would
don't think that you can have something that you're practicing doing the same thing over and over again where you're not doing as much physical exertion as you'd say running or swimming. I think it's a little bit falls too far under entertainment with kind of like how acting is. Like you're out there acting, you do like 20 scenes and you do each scene like 20 times to make sure you get the perfect take because you want it to be done right, if that makes sense. Same thing with like a band doing a concert. You don't That's not considered a sport because the band's out there playing like a concert. Like if you go to a Olivia Rodrigo concert, is she doing a sport because she's singing a song that she practiced 40 times? I don't think she's an athlete, is she?
I would say that the difference is partially whether it's like actual physical activity and partially whether or not it's actual. So, for example, what to say what you said about an actor does it until it's good enough. If you're a performance, then you do it until you hope it's good enough, and then you go and perform for the judges, and the judges analyze you and say, you didn't do it good enough, or you did do it good enough. Congratulations. We're going to give you money now. Congratulations.
Hamilton. Is Hamilton a sport?
No,
No,
because
because it
it's
doesn't
not.
have
You're
physical
not
activity.
competing against other performances.
They out there dancing.
But you're not competing against other performances doing other Hamilton shows or other shows.
There are awards given for different productions, though.
Amen.
I would still consider that to be a performance, but not a competitive performance. That's like I would consider like I would consider marching band and like cheerleading and dance stuff to be kind of their own category. That's like I wouldn't call them a sport, but I would like it's still like very physically taxing and still very like I would still put respect on those and put them like sport adjacent, because they're like affiliated with the umbrella term. Because technically they do fit under the umbrella term of the dictionary definition, but I would still consider them more of a performance than like an actual sport. They're not sports proper.
I would like to hear Cooper's thoughts on this.
I think Jackson is partially right in that the sports are made up of different categories, with performance being a part of it, but not at all a major part. I don't think marching band and dance and cheer are a sport, but I think some of the components of a performance need to be in a game to become a sport. Like with baseball, you're kind of performing for crowds, same with all the other like basketball and whatnot. But it's also you need that competition of going against somebody else. Like Luke said, like racing and running, you can take out the other people and achieve the same result by yourself without going against the group. Whereas in like baseball, basketball, football, you need that other group to do the activity and achieve that result. So you need that competition. And I feel that that is a major part of being a sport.
I have just general food for thought. So, what would y'all say about sports teams who have turned their sport into a performance, such as the Savannah Bananas and the Harlem Globetrotters?
Still consider them a sport because they're still it's not scripted or staged. It's still up to chance, mostly anyway. And it's not entirely practiced and thought out beforehand like a cheer or a dance recital or anything like that. It's still got a little bit of competition to it.
I would say for the Harlem Globetrotters, they do specifically, they fall under the entertainment since it is majority scripted and it's purely for entertainment value. You wouldn't learn them from them how to play a actual sport of basketball and everything. You'd learn them from them. It's more of a theatrical production than anything else, if we're being totally honest. Very improv, but still.
Okay, so you're saying it doesn't matter because okay, I'm trying to think how you remember how you worded it. You basically said it doesn't change if people are or aren't there. Is that like what was it that you said about that?
I was saying that you can take, like in running or rate or swimming, you can take out the other people and still achieve the same result. Like if you have one person running by themselves, they can achieve, I don't know, a 7 minute mile. And then if you do the same thing with like four other people, they can still achieve the 7 minute mile. There's nothing about those four people hindering them. They can still achieve it on their own.
So as someone who has run before, there is definitely a difference between running by yourself and running with people. It's all a mental, like it's all mental game. So, uh, like for example, I always run better with people. I've never run that good by myself. Just because there's like some mental block there. As well as like, let's say I go to a marching band performance and you watch these really, really good shows like go before you, and it makes you anxious and you overthink it and you mess up on your performance. Um, and I'm not saying that should count as like making it a sport, but I want your thoughts on that because that does change your outcome because there's other people there.
I think that the mental aspect of it is definitely a factor, but it's something that can be overcome with enough, I don't know, practice or just perseverance, I guess. But it's not something that'll always be there. Like if you get comfortable enough or confident enough in your ability to do whatever it is you're doing, you can overcome that mental block. It's not a permanent fixture.
Mm. I would provide a counterpoint to that in that at a sporting event, if you're competing in a sporting event, there's always going to be an element of adrenaline, of hype, of being watched, and of having people that you're racing against. Especially me in swim meets, I never got as good times, even at a test set day in practice. I would never get as good at times as I would in a meet, just because the meet atmosphere itself boosted my adrenaline, and the people swimming next to me always pushed me to go faster. It's impossible, almost impossible to get meet times in a practice just because you can't replicate that setting.
I would say there is definitely an element of atmosphere, especially in terms of like if we're talking about the more performance aspect of it. There's like there is a for a band. There's a difference between going to a competition and a concert. If I'm going to a concert, then my parents are there and my friends are there and they're there cheering, they're excited. Versus if I'm going to a competition, there are judges actively walking on the field, breathing down my neck, and literally like watching and listening and critiquing everything about everything I'm doing, even down to like the way the angle that my feet are pointed at and the angle that my horn is pointed above the horizon. I think a thing to take into account when deciding whether something is a sport is the amount of critique and criticism you're getting from the people watching you, and also whether or not you are being judged as you're doing whatever the activity is.
I agree with that, but like, for example, like the same thing applies to like singing competitions. For example, like where a singer goes out there and performs, and then the next person up to sing has that feeling of anxiety of not performing as well as the singer that goes before them. So, would you consider that a sport since there's like competitiveness and like the anxiety that comes with like having to perform as well as other people and also having to perform well enough to prepare like um to like impress a panel of judges? Would you
I
say
would
that's a
say
sport?
no. I think I probably have the loosest definition here. Um, but I would say no because there's no physical activity with that.
Yeah, that's what I'm
Like,
saying. So like
even
I don't
marching
think
band,
that
you're, like, out there
alone.
on the field compared to, like, singing in
Yeah.
a booth. Like, I wouldn't say concert band's a sport. Um,
I think
so
what I think sets marching band and like singing apart, like and like concert stuff apart is that like you're making music, right? Like that's like a fine art and like there's like varying levels of like physical exertion that you need to do to like do fine arts. Like I'd say like for marching band it's the most it would be like the most physical exertion because like you're actually out there marching and stuff. And then like for a concert, like of course you got to play your instrument that requires physical exertion. And then singing, you're like singing that requires some like a little level of physical exertion. But like those are all like under the category of like art, because you're making music. You're not like trying to um beat another team per se, like or like perform better. I mean, you are performing better, like in that sense, but like the judges are judging you based on like how good the music is more often than like how well you physically perform, right?
I do have thoughts here. So I have been to a number of like national band competitions, marching band competitions. I've also been to Drum Corps International on a few times. So the way that works, they do judge your musicality. That is a part of how they judge, but they also judge your control of your own body. They judge your control over your instrument. They also control your visuals. They basically imagine if you took football and then you had the refs going around and basically making sure that everyone's helmets were on properly and giving out flags for if their helmets weren't. And then also giving out flags for like, how pretty a throw was. The difference though is that the goal in football is not for it to look pretty. The difference is that in marching band, it is meant to look pretty, but it's still incredibly taxing because to make it look pretty and it also be impressive, it has to be physically demanding, which is why I would put it in performance, but I would put it like on the, I would put it close because of its physical taxingness. I would put it close to being a sport just because of how physically exerting it can be, especially if you watch professional drum corps international shows. What they have to do is absolutely insane. And so that the amount of time they put into like the fact that people can get paid thousands and thousands of dollars to be on these professional, nationwide bands, and they have to learn how to climb all over a metal cage while someone else is rolling it across a football field. Like it is genuinely insane that people have to or that people are learning how to do these things and then performing it on a daily basis every day for a month.
Yeah, I'd say like the closest comparison that like the biggest like the best argument that I think is a sport that could potentially rope in marching band as a sport also would be like gymnastics, right? Because you're performing and you're like performing physical exertion, but like the judges are also judging like how well you're doing the movements and how well you execute the movements, right? But the thing that disqualifies marching band for me is that there's like it has instruments and music involved. And for me that's just like that's a whole nother category. Since there's a whole nother like aspect of it that you're being judged on rather than just the physical exertion like the rest of what I would call sports do. Like you're not like making music or like performing an art in gymnastics. You're just like trying to impress the judges with your physical like movements and activities and stuff.
My issue with that is it's all subjective. So in soccer, basketball, football, you have a clear winner. It is obvious who wins. Somebody has more points than the other person. And even if we include like running and swimming, somebody did it faster than the other person. We know they did it faster. We're not out here debating, oh, I like this flip more than I liked that cartwheel type of thing, where uh, you have people who have bias and will have bias and can create an unfair environment for who wins.
Okay,
That's
so
that's a really good point.
music and the quality of music isn't the only thing that's being judged at marching competitions. Like what Jackson said, they're judging your horn angle, your exact position on the field, the angle your feet are being pointed at. Two marching bands can perform the same show and still grade differently because one guy decides to stand on a completely different spot where he's supposed to be. So there's more than just the audio of it.
I would also argue that for my definition of a sport is just if it has to be competitive and it has to require a certain level of skill and physical exertion and just like ability. So I would argue that there are some marching bands and other like performances, I would consider them performance activities that are not a sport. With all due respect to our school's marching band, I would not consider that a sport. DCI, on the other hand, I would consider that a sport because of how insane they are. But like I'd say there's basically anything taken to an enough of an I can't speak. Anything taken to enough of an extreme can be considered a sport. You just have to be willing to put in the time and effort to be able to make it that good.
I want to
Okay,
bring back Luke's point where he said that marching band is like the scoring it while it's not completely subjective, like there is subjectivity to it. And I guess the same thing would go for gymnastics. And that's why like those are kind of like on the edge of sports. I feel like that's why most people argue about whether they should be sports or not is because like there's not there's not a definite winner based on data. Like it's all in the eyes of the judges. Like there's obviously bias there. You can never get rid of the bias of those things. And that's why people argue about them so much. So it's just like a little it's kind of iffy. But I feel
so
like where I draw the line is where like you bring in an instrument, right? That's all I'll say about that.
why? Look, I want to. Why do you disqualify it just because it has an instrument in it? I want to see.
Because because it's a completely like different category of like performance, like when you're performing musically, it's a whole different audience than like for example, like the audience that would watch gymnastics. Like, it's in music and it's more of an art than it is a sport is what I'm saying.
I would agree with you on that. I would say it's kind of a spectrum of like you have things that are purely performance. You have things that are performance and physically exerting, and then you have things that are purely physically exerting. So you'd have like running is just purely physically exerting. Like like the reason why people will finish a cross country meet and immediately just throw up everywhere because it's just that physically taxing. Like marching band in the extreme cases, not in like smaller bands and stuff like that. They don't do this, but the extreme ones will just have people like collapse on the field during performances because it sucks. That one is physically exerting and also a performance. But then full performance, no physical exertion, is like an actual concert when you just go to a concert hall and perform, whatever piece you've been preparing for the past year and a half.
Luke, you seem like you want to say something.
Yeah.
There is a certain aspect to running where there's a reason why you're throwing up. You're pushing your body to the limit. I don't think you can push your body to the limit doing marching band. I think there is a large level of difference. Don't look at me like that, Jackson. There is a large level of difference between running and marching band. Marching band, you're walking around with, I'll say, it's a heavy instrument. Not James. James plays clarinet. That's not heavy. But you're not out there running a mile in sub like 4:30. You're not out there absolutely pushing yourself to the limit to the max of like human ability. Marching band, you're not getting close to where the human body can function. And that's where I think there should be a line drawn with how hard marching band is. Can it be difficult? Yes, it can be difficult. But you still do not have the opportunity to even push yourself that far.
Yeah, I would say for me, building off of that, an essential part of the definition of a sport for me is that extreme physical exertion, pushing your body to the limit.
I would say that's why I would say it's borderline because on the lower end, it is not physically exerting. I could go out today and after not having marched for like 2 years, could go and perform a show that I learned yesterday and be fine. However, DCI is also a thing where they'll have a they will literally pay a couple $1,000s and then they'll go start practicing in June, and then the entire month of July they spend on the road doing 15-minute performances every single day for a month, and basically it sucks. And they are actually like, okay, my high school band, we we were we competed on a national level, but they made us look like children. We would have to we had to push around 300-pound props. I ran over people with this prop. I nearly had my ACL cut by one of these props. But then these people will literally get on a 12-foot tall metal ball and roll it around a stage for 15 minutes. And you know, that is a whole nother. I would consider that a sport because of how physically exerting that is, because that's on a whole
You,
nother level.
you said they performed for 2 months, 15 minutes a day.
I would like to see. Have you ever watched DCI? I'm gonna have to show y'all some DCI videos. I know y'all aren't gonna appreciate them, but I'm still gonna show y'all them at some point.
I appreciate that, Jackson.
Okay, Luke. So, are you ruling it out because it's a 15-minute performance?
No, I was just nitpicking.
Why?
Why not?
I would say like, okay, stuff that's in the Olympics, discus and shot put only lasts a couple seconds. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah, but discus and shot
Discus
put,
and shot put
clear
don't fall into
winner.
my category of sports to begin with.
There's a clear winner
Yeah,
based
but we don't
on
care about your
physical
definition of a sport. You're
data.
wrong.
Okay, Luke. So let's take
The
the
most
idea of discus.
athletic person in the group's opinion does not matter about
No,
sports. I agree.
No,
Luke.
not really.
Okay, let's take the idea of discus or
You're right.
shot put,
Sam's the most
and let's only change one thing, and that's we put a guy who's trying to stop the guy who's throwing it. Right? That would make it a sport under your definition.
It would be a lot more enjoyable to watch.
Yeah.
I agree.
So would that become a sport then?
Yes.
Yeah.
Probably should try
I
to
think they
come
should
up with
add
like a consensus eventually.
competitive vacuuming to the Olympics too, since you can technically do defense on that.
I think as we're kind of wrapping this up, sort of. What is it, Luke?
I think we have come to the conclusion that everybody has their own opinions, and that's what makes opinions beautiful. Because it's mine, it's all
Don't get
mine,
all
and
sentimental.
y'all have your
Shut up.
opinions, and
Shut up, Sloke.
we're all different, and it's lovely. And
I don't want a happy
my
ending.
opinion's the only right one.
No happy endings allowed.
We all need to come to a consensus of what we believe
I say the
a sport is.
consensus.
I
Now
think we
that
should
we've
come to a consensus that Luke is wrong.
yes,
Yeah, I think
His
that's
definition's
One
too
v-
narrow.
Yeah,
Yes.
1v1.
narrow.
I think
It's
honestly
also-
mine is probably too loose and Luke's is too narrow, and then everyone
Thank you.
else's falls in between.
And
But I
mine
think
is
we need
the
to
only
come to
correct one.
like we need to come to an idea of what we would consider to be a sport, if that makes sense.
We
I
wanna
will
create a
not
whiteboard for
agree
this.
with whatever y'all put out because I stand on business, and sadly, y'all cannot affect my opinion. This has been way too thought out for me that there is just I'm too stubborn, guys. I think that's the issue. I'm too stubborn to actually listen to other people and their ideas. So I think my mind's been already made up since I was like 4 years old.
All right. Well, we'll see you in the next one. Goodbye, squad.